Cove, because they didn't determine where the boundaries lie. The post office was called Carrollton because it sat close to the Tennessee-North Carolina border. That's the reason why they call it Carrollton.
Okay.
But then that was 86 after the post office was no longer there. So they would have to go to Poplar to actually get their mail. Now, you know, people will say, well, the railroad named it Lost Cove. But from the 1901 schedules, it has always been Lost Cove.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's always been known as Lost Cove, even, you know, from, well, that was the earliest schedule that I found, and Martha Irwin actually gave it, they gave that one to me. So, because it has the south and southern, it's two railroads battled before Carter bought what would now be called Carolina Clinchfield. One was called the South and Western Railroad, one was called the Southern Railway. And so they battled up in the gorge of who was going to build from Poplar to Irwin. And originally the actually railroad was going to be on the opposite side where the campgrounds are at. That's the way it was originally going to come down. But then one black man sat there for 2 to 3 years. And then the Southern decided not to. South and Western decided not to, and the Southern bought it and then built it all the way to Irwin. Yes, sir.
Did they have a regular stop at Lost Cove?
Yeah. They sure did, 3 times a day.
When did that start?
Well, the earliest that I've seen, it had to be in the late, early 1901 is the first schedule I've seen all of it. Now, it could be 1899 or somewhere right in there, but it's always been me 1901 for I haven't found any other documents for that. But yes, they did southbound early in the morning, northbound mid-afternoon, and southbound and northbound. So there was like, yeah, it could be up to 6 though. It depended on how many, on the schedule in the book, you could see how many would travel at this time, how many traveled average that would travel at this time. So there's other schedules. I got a 1903 schedule and 1907. 1907, they had the rock, there's a big old stone wall, right, that goes around what we call Maggie's Way, which is right there at the entrance close to Lost Cove, where they had to build it up, and so there's plans here in the archives that show when they built that. So.
You said you were there in 2019 last time? Was that John Miller, y'all house still standing? It was there in 2016.
Was it? See,
it was about ready to come down.
Was it? Yeah.
It was the only one left.
It was the only one.
Is that the one with the wood stove?
It was the only one, yeah, you could see that porch was still there.
Yeah.
Wood was gone.
Yeah. Yeah, well, no, that house is still there. Now, John Miller's was the yellow house. It sat down
Well,
towards.
this is the one, not too far.
Yeah, that's
off the
Chester
road.
Bailey's. No, it's still there.
Okay.
It's hanging on by a
It
thread.
looked like that house, that's why. I
Yeah,
thought
it's
it-
hanging on by a thread,
Yeah.
but it's still there.
Somebody had that in the early 80s and took care of it after the guy with the shotgun was gone. There was a hunting camp in there.
Oh, really?
And somebody built 3 or 4 lodges
Oh,
that you could rent. And I don't know who you rented them from, but when we went in there, it was like, you thought somebody had just walked out. There wasn't anybody there, and there was these lodges that were there.
2013, the Southern Appalachian Highland Servicing bought 95 acres in there. And they still own it, if I'm not mistaken, today. They own from, say, Chester Bailey's house over to down the cemetery down to the bottom of the railroad tracks.
So they're part of the Nature Conservancy? Yeah, they're.
And they actually, the Conservancy teams up with Highland Brewery in Asheville, and they make a lot of beers, right? And so proceeds from those beers go to the Conservancy. So like Cold Mountain, they make Cold Mountain. They make Lost Cove beer. And I try to get them to make it this year, but they're not running it, because it'd be great for it to be out at the same time the book is, right? Proceeds can go to the Conservancy, but so, we know the Conservancy's getting ready to, preserve like so many acres up there on Carter's Gap, right? They're getting ready to do Norton Road Mountain, so it's a really great thing that they're doing that, and they went in there and cleaned everything out. Like, they helped with the trails, right, and they helped clean some of the buildings. The one that Hosea and Priscilla were sitting in, it was all trash at one time. They took all that trash out. So, yeah, they still own some of it. At some point, they're supposed to turn it back over. But Norman Canoe, he lives in South Carolina, and he owns some of that land, and it got clumped in somehow with the Conservancy, and so he's battling that right now with some of the surveyors that come in there from the County.
When you say get turned back over to Bethesda, or?
Yeah, it'll go back to the Forest Service at some point. But, I mean, there's around 300 acres of land for everybody, 350, something like that. And when you think about it, the Pisgah is like 3,400 feet, and so where Lost Cove's at is about 2,500. So you're dropping close to 1,000 feet from the top of the mountain coming down into the community. It's easy going down. But, I mean, who wants to go to railroad tracks all the time either? Because I'm telling you, it's not fun. So, I mean, it's about 2.5 hours, it's an all-day hike. I will tell you that. I mean, there's no way around that it's going to get out of there quick, looking hard. And if you go from the top down and walk out and hit your ride at Unicoi Springs, leave the house or car down there, and you walk for 2.5 miles on the railroad tracks. Which of course the trains don't run as much as they used to, because you wouldn't want to get caught on certain parts of that railroad track with that train.
Was Unicoi Springs big when the sawmill was big? It's simultaneous.
Yeah, I mean, people come from all over the country to stay in Unicoi Springs Hotel, right? And so it was, some of the people from Lost Cove are actually buried in Unicoi Springs Cemetery, but not many. But yeah, they Chester Bailey's house sat next or across the street from them. When they moved out, they lived there, and now like today, before I came here, Polly Miller's son Jim, he owns that house that Chester Bailey owns, and he owns the hotel. And so I was there today talking to them, and they were winterizing the house and everything. I asked them, are you going to, did you get a historical grant to be able to take care of the hotel? And, it's solid. He's like, it's totally solid. That hotel's totally solid except for the porch, right? Of course, it's only or not even 3/4 there. It's about less than half of what was actually the hotel. So, but yeah, he'd like to fix it up. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Anybody else? I mean, I will start out saying that the Archives of Appalachia has the best material that if you are interested in history. The railroad files were huge because one year I might have been here in like 2000, I graduated in 2007 with my Master's of Arts and Legal Studies because Appalachian Studies fell underneath that degree. Right now you have your own Appalachian Studies master's degree and degree. And so, in 2003 I could sit here, well, what took me so long? And it's because that each time that I came back here, there was more material. There was something different. It didn't all just fall in my lap. It was dedication for one. Yeah, and so I just think that the railroad files, correspondences within the railroad chapter are huge because it gives you that in-depth look of what they actually produced up there, right? And how much they produced, and then the friction between the railroad and Mac English. you know? And so, you know, like I said, the best stories are the ones that were told to me for the people who live there, right? And I think collecting oral stories heal now, right? Because seriously, you don't know how long some people are gonna be around. So, you know, always collecting stories is, I think, one of the best sources that you can have in any type of literature that you produce. So, and I enjoy the archives. I don't get up here as much as often, but I'm sure there's something else hidden in here that I could start a new book on. Right? So,
Well, Christy, this was a long process. I can't think of anybody else who did a master's thesis that got turned into a book that came out with a press the quality of the quality. So I'm sure there's somebody else. I can't think of them right now. And so this is kind of a big deal.
I really appreciate Dr. O'Donnell, Dr. Tedesco, and Dr. Tesloy were all three on my board for my dissertation. And I thank you for being here, Dr. Tedesco. And of course, Kevin's a good friend of mine. We hang out not as much as we used to, but yeah, and Dr. Lloyd's not here, but they asked some tough questions, you know, but I'm glad that I stuck with the research. I think I love history and, you know, it's always great. I always say, you know, I always talk about Jackson Love exit out there in Unicoi County. Well, that's where Andrew Jackson had a horse race with Colonel Robert Love, who was a Confederate. And Jackson actually won. No, excuse me, Love won. So that's why they named Jackson Love exit. Yeah, and so, but the racetrack is actually on Chestover Pike. So, it was a big racetrack. Yeah. But, there's a lot of different, this Washington County is where it's at, right? This is the beginning of Tennessee. So, there's tons of history here.
One personal question,
Yes.
because obviously this has been an obsession for quite a long time. What now? What do you do now?
Well, I do teach part-time Appalachian history at King. And I also am a director and owner of a nonprofit. So I do a lot of education in the schools for substance abuse. And so that's pretty much where it's at right now until I start something else. But I wish I was like a Ron Rash, that I could take historical nonfiction and turn it into fiction, because he does a magnificent job of that. That would be awesome. But I'm not so much a fiction person as I am nonfiction.
You still write much poetry?
That's where I started.
Yeah.
But I'm going to. Yeah, Jane Hicks, who's called the Possum Poet, the Cosmic Possum Poet, is, I guess, at some point she'll be my mother-in-law, and she's an awesome poet, but yeah, she would be the one to edit my book if I did. But yeah, I'd like to go back to my roots, and I know you'd like me to be there at the Wednesday night, and 7 o'clock.
Well, let's thank Christy again.
Yeah.